Hello and welcome. I'm Brett Theodos with the Urban Institute, Senior Fellow and Director of our Community Economic and Development Hub. And we are excited that you are joining us for a webinar on investment growth and equity in the DC region. I'm going to show us a couple of housekeeping items, and then we're going to go on with some framing. So first, just a couple of housekeeping things. Everybody will be muted for the duration of the event, but we do want to hear from you. So please go ahead and put your questions into the Q&A box. The chat function won't work, but the Q&A function will. Also, the event is being recorded and it will go live on the same webpage where you registered before. You can hide captions or add them with the show hide caption feature. And we do have a survey at the end, so please put your thoughts there. I'll come back on in just a minute with a brief presentation, but I want to pass it first to Nadine Duplessis-Kearns, who's the VP of Mid-Atlantic Corporate Responsibility at JPMorgan Chase, and she's going to help frame up our event. Nadine, thanks.
Thanks, Brett. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nadine Duplessis-Kearns, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Mid-Atlantic Region Vice President on the Global Philanthropy team at JPMorgan Chase. I welcome you all today to this conversation on investment growth and equity in the DC region. This follows the release of a case study and tool funded by JPMorgan Chase and conducted by Urban Institute, a longtime partner of the bank. The DC area's growing population has brought increased investments, but these investments and related benefits have not been evenly distributed across the region. I saw this from where I recently sat, leading strategies and philanthropic investments at the Meyer Foundation, and now from where I sit with JPMorgan Chase. And I also see it every day as a district resident for over 20 years. This region has economic strengths and divides that are fairly well understood at a high level, but require digging deeper to craft solutions that can move us forward. It's why we're happy to support this research feature in discussion as one part of how we're advancing inclusive growth in the region. We're committed to creating a more equitable Greater Washington region. We're thankful to all of you who share in this commitment, and so welcome. Thanks for joining, and we're excited for the conversation. Thanks, Brett.
Cool. Thanks, Nadine. Okay, so I'm going to give a brief presentation, and then we are going to have a great panel discussion with some experts who sit in different seats, different sectors, different perspectives, different geographies across the region. But I wanted to start us off by framing what investment looks like in the DC region. And so we can get at that in a number of different ways. But the ways that I want to start are like this. So we've put out a new analysis. We're looking at investment patterns. And a high level takeaway is the district and most of the counties surrounding it lead the nation in overall investment. Among the top 100 largest US counties by population, DC area jurisdictions, you see them in these darker blues, they hold the top 4 spots, several of the top 10 or 15 in overall investment per household. And all but one county are in the top third. Prince George's, my home county, is in the bottom half. But even there, it's still not among the nation's most invested places by any means. While the region attracts more overall investment than other places, this strength is driven largely by its housing sectors. So we see really high investment levels in the region for single family and also for multifamily investment. But that does in a way mask some areas of weakness in the region. So in particular, take note of the lower rankings around small business capital, and also around non-residential, commercial, office, warehouse, industrial, manufacturing. Even when we account for population growth in the region, we see on a per person basis, per household basis, a dramatic increase in investment that happened between 2010 and 2015. It rose by more than 50%. But since 2015, we really do see a leveling off and even a bit of a retrenchment. So things were cooling even in advance of the pandemic. Now, investment in the region certainly has coincided with a rise in gentrification, and that's especially true in the eastern and the northeastern parts of the district itself, some other communities as well. And this rise in investment has also coincided with sprawl in the region as more capital and residents go beyond the inner suburbs. Most DC neighborhoods west of the Anacostia River have very high investment levels between 2010 and 20, as did many of the communities in Maryland, Virginia on either side of the Potomac River. Conversely, DC's neighborhoods east of the Anacostia River, as well as much of Prince George's County, receive relatively low investment per household. Now, we can also see when we look at the underlying characteristics and attributes of those neighborhoods that we see visualized here, we can see that higher poverty neighborhoods in DC receive appreciably less investment than do lower poverty neighborhoods. Disparities in investment are even more stark when we look in terms of neighborhoods' racial composition. And that's the result, as we know, of generations of efforts to exclude people and communities from wealth building opportunities. So while higher poverty neighborhoods, for example, receive less investment overall, the story is different when we start digging into some of the different sectors. And so specifically, we can see that mission investment, this includes CDFI lending, but it's not limited to it, is much more present and prevalent in higher poverty neighborhoods, also in some communities of color. And we see the same storyline when we look at federal investment, a real progressive distribution here relative to what we saw in the private market capital. The DC region, thankfully, has one of the strongest mission finance sectors in the country, right? So here is DC itself right near the top. The strength is somewhat uneven, though. The district itself is very robust in mission finance, but Prince George's County, Fairfax County, they are lagging in terms of investment from and through the mission finance sector. And when we look at federal investment, we can see that some of the Virginia regional jurisdictions have reasonably high federal investment levels, but some of these jurisdictions do not, and some of the same for some of the Maryland jurisdictions. Importantly, though the Washington region's mission and finance, and federal sectors are strong, they are not large as a share of the total investment pie. So these sectors really make up a small piece of overall investment. And therefore the mission and the federal sectors, and if we had the data, we could add in the state and the local efforts, they're still making a relatively small gap. They're not able to overcome the disparities that we see in the broader market. And in this case, they're each representing roughly 1% of overall investment. So looking ahead, the DC region faces two challenges: finding growth in new ways and new opportunities, new avenues for growth, especially amid the pandemic's effects, and also ensuring that that growth is equitable. So we need solutions that are prioritizing place-based and people-based community development, housing development, policy tools, and programs that can fuel growth and avoid gentrification and displacement. So we are going to hear from our panel of experts on how to do that, how to thread that needle. And so I would like to invite everybody to come on camera, our virtual stage here, and we will dig in. So joining us, we have Marla Bolanek, who's president and CEO of NALCAB. Kathy Hollander is president of Greater Washington Partnership. We have Amir Kirkwood, who is president and CEO of Virginia Community Capital, CDF5. And we have Aspasia Expolia, director of Housing Community Development in Prince George's County. And so we're not going to do long intros right here, but they are going to draw in their experience in current seats as well as previous seats into this discussion. And so we are going to kick it off. Thanks so much for joining us. Excited to dig in with you all. So where I wanted to start was that we saw the DC region having had considerable growth in investment up until 2015, and then stalling out, leveling off. And now there are even more headwinds and weaker points. DC is among the lowest cities in daytime downtown office visits. Private sector may be contracting somewhat, illustrated by HQ2 scaling down. Federal government has contracted, actually, the number of employees that have a footprint in DC. DC's population itself, the district, is roughly 20,000 lower than it was in 2020. The region's weak in small business, as we heard. And while we probably don't want the problems that correspond to the go-go boom and growth that we had earlier, we don't also really want stagnation. So I'd love to start off with, what are the growth prospects and drivers for our region? What can and should be done? And Kathy, we will start with you.
Great. So great to be here with everyone. I am going to try to start out with some positivity here in terms of our competitive growth drivers. We are a city and region where we face tremendous challenges, as noted, but we also have many unique and differentiating attributes that are drivers for the region. We have an extremely diverse and educated community. We have almost 50% of our population has a bachelor's degree and over 90% high school graduation rate. And we are home to incredible research institutions, post-secondary institutions, large employers, especially in the professional service industry. So while we also have the large employers, and this is also putting, looking through a lens of 10 years of leading the food service industry here in the region, we also have a high concentration of small businesses that really help make our region and communities very unique compared to other parts of the country. And again, that is through the lens of food service, our restaurants, recognizing that small business restaurants are 92% independently owned and operated in this region. That was and is something that we should all feel very proud of. And while it makes small businesses much more fragile, their ability to pivot was easier. And their ability to be innovative was higher than other industries or other larger employers, particularly during a time when we were all struggling through the pandemic. Another driver is that we are the seat of the federal government. And while we are all having conversations or in conversations where we're trying to create more value in-person collaboration, maybe having more people be in the office than out of the office, it's a driver. It creates meaningful and stable career opportunities for many. And then I'd also note that, DC has more tech jobs now, specifically software developers, than Silicon Valley. And that was noted in the Wall Street Journal article recently. A lot of our work is tracking skills and talent and also tech adjacent opportunities. And we know that we have an opportunity there. In terms of very quickly growth prospects for the region, we recently launched an updated inclusive growth dashboard, which is a tool that really explores the region's economic growth and shared prosperity. And it was a tool that we developed with some of our partners at EY and McKinsey. But what the hope is that through the dashboard, like many tools that all of us create, that policymakers, nonprofit leaders, elected officials, they're using this to inform their own policy that is hopefully moving our region forward as we grow inclusively. But a few gleanings from the dashboard that may speak to opportunities here is that while we were rooted in strong data points in areas of GDP, diversity, education levels, like I mentioned, and broadband access, interestingly. It also shows that we still have a lot of work to do in small business ownership, in home ownership, in labor force participation. And I think that that is an area where when we talk about drivers, we talk about areas for growth. That will be an area that I think as a region, we will need to double down and think about how we are really creating the solutions to support our small businesses, not only in terms of entry and opportunity, but in terms of scale and sustainability.
Thank you for that. And so lots of strength to grow on, some challenges ahead. I heard optimism. Great. Anybody else want to jump in on drivers, future of growth for the region? I want to.
Right.
Yeah,
So how you doing?
please.
I think one of the things from the perspective of CDFI that we are highly focused on, and this really leverages Kathy's comments, is that the shift in population, particularly when you think of low income, middle income, working class families, it's happened. It's now truly regional. The concentration density in urban areas still remains in some cases, but it is not uncommon to see a family, commuting in from, or households commuting in from Stafford or Loudoun County to work, although not very many people, as Kathy said, are commuting as much today these days, but that reality of the commute is there. But the bigger point is that the world of jobs and housing affordability also has to catch up with where the transition of people is going. And it's one of the nice elements to being a part of a regional economy with the amount of large corporations, large institutional employers. It helps to create a bigger ecosystem of employment. And part of, I think, our objective is to figure out how do we get the ability for those partners to invest, to extend itself and sort of, follow and meet where populations are in the region.
Super helpful. And I want to return to some of those regional questions because I think they're both a real strength and a challenge for us. Absolutely. So where I'd like to go next is that our region has plenty of successful solopreneurs, right? Freelancers and consultants. It doesn't have as strong a track record. We heard some restaurant aside, as other regions of employer small businesses driving economic growth. And if the federal government is not expanding, if it is contracting, how do we cultivate a more robust small business sector? We have a lot of supports like business coaching and technical assistance and even CDFI lending, but those supports have traditionally been quite limited in their scope and scale relative to the size of the small business sector. So how would you say the DC region can best grow its small business sector? How can it do so in a way that overcomes some of the historical and contemporary inequities we have in business formation and also in capital access? Marla, let's start with you for this one.
Sure. Thanks, Brett. Thanks so much for having me on this panel. It's very dear to my heart, as everyone on the call are. We're all, residents of this region, so it's meaningful and probably particularly of interest. So a couple of things that I wanted to say. So one, when you framed the question, it sort of got me to thinking of where the DC, or at least DC in particular, fits with regard to sole proprietors versus just the rest of the nation. So I did a little bit of digging, and the sort of baseline national number of sole proprietors, so the percentage of U.S. businesses that are sole proprietors are 73%. So that's a pretty high number. And I don't think that's surprising because we know that sort of smaller businesses are very down on that extreme end of size. In DC, 69% of businesses are 5 employees or less. So it's sort of, we're doing better than the national average, not necessarily by leaps and bounds, but we're at the average, if not slightly better than the average. So I thought that was just kind of an interesting point to ground us. But this is, the next part is just sort of my opinion, and I'll just say, these are my thoughts. But I think the challenge with small business technical assistance is there's no way to get around how labor intensive it is. It just is extremely human capital intensive, monetary capital intensive. It's just very draining, for lack of a better way of putting it. And so I think there's some interesting things going on in the region with regard to, and in particular with retail businesses, with regard to looking at corridors rather than individual businesses. So it's kind of a way to achieve economies of scale by looking at, multiple businesses that are physically in a row. Again, this is, exclusive to retail businesses, restaurants, shops. But for example, in Montgomery County, Maryland, and Prince George's County, Maryland, there has been an effort around preserving small businesses that are in the path of the Purple Line metro construction. And I think what we have seen there is that by having on-site kind of cop on the beat presence of technical assistance providers in the corridors, there's a real opportunity not only to preserve, but to grow businesses. And I'll take a little bit of a leap with an analogy, is it's kind of like the difference between our healthcare system and the UK's healthcare system, that in the UK, you have, visiting doctors that actually still make house calls. My sister lives in the UK, so I know this for a fact. Whereas, in the US, you go when you're sick. So it's a little bit different in the sense that you've got people who are kind of around in the corridor, at least in this particular example of Purple Line, that are there, whether you're feeling great or struggling, and I think that has proven to be a very interesting model. Another example of kind of looking at businesses in aggregate is in DC, the Great Streets program, which is a city grant that's available to small businesses to do capital improvements on their business. And you get extra points if you are located in proximity of another business that is a recipient or potential recipient of this grant. So I think, again, kind of looking outside of the individualized business and seeing how we can support multiple businesses and kind of perpetuate change in that way. And then just a couple of other thoughts. I think there's a lot of interesting examples happening in the region where you're seeing like local businesses taking advantage of government contracting opportunities like the airport. We've got Ben's Chili Bowl at the airport now. The more we can replicate that, I think there are really, really exciting opportunities there. And then the last thing I'll just say, and with this question in mind, well, 2 quick thoughts. One is that our CDFI sector here is just not really that robust. DC has 3 small business focused CDFIs. The borough of Brooklyn has 4 CDFIs just for Brooklyn. So there's just disproportionate there. We've got a lot of CDFIs, but when you're talking about CDFIs focused on small businesses. And then the last thing, there's a huge opportunity for private sector to step in. Kaiser Permanente has been very active in Prince George's County, particularly in Riverdale. They've also been very active in West Baltimore. JP Morgan Chase, plug to JP Morgan Chase who opened up this call, but they've been very active in Baltimore and Cherry Hill. So I think, we've got to really explore how private sector can fill in gaps when government is just simply not able to take it all on themselves. So those are my thoughts for that question, and then I'll pass it on to my colleagues.
Thank you. A lot of rich insights there. Amir, you do small business as well. What are your reflections on our region, especially as you compare to some of the other places you sit?
Yeah, I think to just sort of piggyback on Marla's comments, I think while we're proud of the CDFI sector here, and that's the world I represent, it really is important to step back and understand what financing for small businesses means and what their needs are, because we probably are missing some gaps in the financing continuum for small businesses because we haven't fully looked at it systemically, sort of to Marla's point about it versus looking at individual businesses. I'll give you an example from the perspective of VCC. It was clear to us as we look in doing small business lending in different parts of Virginia, where a majority of our lending is located, how much small businesses lacked equity and were really dependent on the classic mom and pop angel, being the angel investor in them, or family being the angel investor in them, and then trying to find the most affordable form of debt capital that they can get. As a result, businesses that were driven by very sort of cyclical incomes became very vulnerable to payday lending. And unfortunately, Virginia is a payday lender friendly state by statute. So what we began to do is explore how do we compete against the source of capital that's being a part of the problem versus just thinking about how do we generate volume in lending. And one of the things that's come out of that is led us to look at revenue-based lending, for example, and sort of, let's not try to create the wheel in a sense, but let's just go directly at the product that seems to be the most cancerous in communities, and recreate the product for ourselves, and just do it cheaper, do it more efficiently, do it with the appropriate level of ethics and mission that CDFIs are driven for. So those same borrowers still don't have collateral to lend against, or they still don't have equity to lend against. So they still need a product similar to what payday lending has been providing, but they need it from a partner, not from a predator in a sense. And so that's an example of it. But knowing to do something like that comes from understanding the place in which that business operates and what are the conditions that are going to drive it. So, high service-oriented businesses with limited margins are going to need some form of lending that really does run right to the operating company and right to sort of the working capital and cash that they need. So being able to kind of go there and provide that capital is sort of the answer that we thought was an appropriate way of dealing with it at a systemic level.
Love that. And I think it also really illustrates the market gap that you're serving there. Keep the questions coming in the Q&A tab, and I'll be drawing them in. But Kathy, did you want to add anything? What would you like to see to grow the small business space?
Yeah, Marla, I loved all of what you said, but so much of it resonated for me. And again, Marla and Amir are going to know better than anyone else here, but let me just share a couple things in terms of some of the work that we're doing to focus on supporting small and diverse businesses, really thinking about the table that we're creating. So we have the large employers from private sector, and we are pulling in, small business, and we're thinking about it through the lens of this holistic approach to support small business, including mentorship, coaching, sponsorship, technical assistance, but most importantly, access to capital. And we've developed through this work these playbooks and toolkits that are really based on convenings through this table to be able to really think about and determine opportunities and barriers for trying to make some progress in this area. And I now, going too many years back, but as a small business owner many, many moons ago, I remember the tears and the frustration around being really excited that I got a contract, being really scared that I couldn't do anything beyond that contract to sustain and survive as a small business. And actually, was I making any money on that contract? Understanding what needed to be expended in terms of energy, infrastructure, staffing, all of it. But we really see a significant opportunity through and with this table to rethink anything and everything from procurement policies and approaches, including tactics like unbundling contracts and shortening payment cycles, so that small businesses not only have that entry point, but they have some of the tools to be able to grow and thrive outside of that initial point of engagement. And finally, on this point, I would just share that, Marla mentioned private sector, and working with private sector to really think about ways in which we can support small business. We are launching this business accelerator program in partnership with 1863 Ventures, and we're doing it with the Truist Foundation. And the idea really is to identify selected diverse businesses to go through a structured curriculum to help scale their business. Think about networking with companies, how to understand and assess their capital options. So our goal is really to be able to help diverse businesses in our region better compete and win procurement contracts, as well as grow and thrive. So I just wanted to add those few points. I think that there's a lot of opportunity in this area, but I think we have to think beyond entree point and think more in rooting our solutions in growth and thriving for a small business community.
All of those suggestions. I want to get to housing, and Nastasya, we're going to pull you into this conversation in just a minute. I can't resist a little moderator privilege for just a couple codas on the small business thinking, and that is, we heard about presence of CDFIs and small business, or more limited presence relative to housing. I think we also need really careful thought on if we've achieved the investment and loan capital we need at every stage. And a colleague and friend, Mary Miller, up in Baltimore, did a really intriguing scan that showed enough capital in the 250K to 500K range. But anytime a business needs anything north of $5 million, they're moving out because they're just not able to get the VC that is coming in. And so our region, I say that as illustration, not as direct application, to say that we really need to look closely at the microloans versus the, and every step of the way up, including some of the angel and other equity forms, to see that our capital needs are getting met. And what that, I think also another thing that it will really call for us is, and I know I'm a researcher, so this might be self-interested, but we really don't have good insights into, does in-person coaching work better than online? Does it work better for very small businesses or bigger? Does it work better to be delivered in a 1 week intensive sprint or spaced out over the course of 2 years? Something that's more didactic, something that's more coaching. We really have so limited evidence about what works in the small business support space that I really would like to see some more advancement there. And part of that challenge is not every tool, probably all of these are good, but they meet somewhat different needs. And so it's really not just about thumbs up, thumbs down, but what's the best fit? Because, and I'm going to push our participants in the public sector, but also in philanthropy. We wrote a memo for DC Council about what their strategy a couple of months back could be. And it means something very different to try, for example, to overcome divides either by gender or by race in terms of who owns a business than it does in terms of business revenues. Because one solution might mean you start a lot of very small businesses, and another might be you invest in a fewer number of high growth businesses. And that has sectoral implications, that has spatial implications, that has distributional implications. So just really getting really fine grained on what we actually want to achieve in the small business space and for whom, and then for how. Okay, I want to go to housing. So we heard the DC region has a very strong housing market, and we saw that especially in owner occupancy, but also in multifamily. So let's start with single family. High investment means there's considerable wealth to tap for owners with equity, Yay. But it also means high barriers to entry. Mwah. So what can we do to encourage more home ownership, especially in light of the stark divides in ownership by race that really have not improved in several decades? So Spasi, let's draw you into this conversation. And what would you like to add?
Thank you, Brent. So first and foremost, I think to level set, because affordable homeownership is a hot, unresolved topic around the country. So it's not a regional problem. And I have been in government for just a little over 2 years now. And before that, I was a developer myself, working in different regions. So drawing from that experience, I think what is very important to say is that back in the early 90s, when the LIHTC program became up at the federal level, it really changed the landscape of affordable rental production around the country. And it did it in a way that enticed the private sector to participate, investors, developers figured it out, local governments figured out how to work together. So although we are still behind in the country in producing affordable rental opportunities, I cannot imagine where we would be if it wasn't for that program. There is nothing on the homeownership, affordable homeownership production at the federal level and at the higher levels of government that just does that, right? And I know that in the last 10 years, this idea of the neighborhood home tax credit has been discussed. And last year we all got like excited and then unexcited very quickly on the promise and then how quickly died. But until there is something at the higher level of government really pushing through affordable homeownership production, we're always going to struggle with that, regardless of where you are in the country, and especially in regions with strong markets. Now, having said that, Prince George's County is still a place in this very strong region that has an opportunity for lateral mobility, because our affordable housing stock for first-time home buyers is still accessible to more people than it is in our neighboring jurisdictions in the District of Columbia. And so where we are staying laser focused is looking at how we can partner closer with Maryland DHCD in leveraging our down payment assistance with their programs so we can deepen the impact. But Prince George's County has been the place in Maryland where the state's down payment assistance program has the most robust outcome. And some of the most recent numbers I saw was that in 2021, MMP, which is the Maryland's program, closed over 800 loans in Prince George's County for new home ownership. And the average price was $330,000 per unit. We also know that about 70% of the loans that closed were for people who make 80% and below. So I'm saying this to say that there is still opportunity in Prince George's County, and that's where we're working very hard to not lose it as we also are looking to grow it and we see this market pressures stride. And I think all of us, both researchers and advocates and the public sector and the private sector, need to stay laser focused and keep at the forefront the discussions about implied biases that we still see in the lending industry, in the appraisals that were hitting the news like some months ago, because there are still these practices out there that even when there is a landscape where it allows you access to opportunity, that landscape is not exactly the same for everybody.
Thank you for that, absolutely. We just saw the president's budget proposing $100 million added into the home program for first-time homeowner down payment assistance. But the budget proposed is not the budget passed, as we know. And so, yes, that's important. And then thinking through how the regional jurisdictions can better support that and can do it in a way that only gives people shallower subsidies, closing cost down payment assistance who need that help, but also deeper subsidies on the order of something you might put in a community land trust, 100,000, 150, 200,000 for people who really need that deeper support. Let's turn to multifamily and talk about strengths and weaknesses in the region there. Is there even such a thing as one multi-family market? Amir, let's start with you there.
Yeah, I think the multifamily market, to me, it first and foremost reflects the growth and the challenges I think associated with it reflect the growth of the region and where the population has continued to move. So I live in Arlington County, and in Arlington, obviously, it's benefited from all of the sort of positive elements of home ownership. Um, my family, we live in probably a post-war little small house that was built for military families, and the value on it is unbelievable, just because of the growth of the region. Having said that, then when it comes to multifamily housing, particularly multifamily rental for low to moderate income house communities, it has turned a fundamentally liberal leaning community into some deep elements of NIMBYism as a result. And if probably borne out the most in the recent fights to not allow for multi-unit housing in single family areas of the city. So it does nothing but push the cost structure out. Now, how do you answer that? That doesn't create room for LIHTC. It doesn't create room for other subsidized housing programs. So you're now dealing for affordable housing developers in the region with the need to probably go to larger scale when they try to do development. So if they find a 25, 50 building garden apartment community, affordable housing developers are now competing against for-profit developers to acquire that entire property, because that's the only way they can get to the scale they need to be able to finance affordable housing. There's not either, I think, a legislative will right now locally in the communities or any sort of mandates coming from across the Anacostia in Virginia and probably in Maryland as well to push for infill housing or push for the type of multifamily housing that really puts people back in place locally to where their jobs are. So we have a bit of a policy issue we need to address first before we can really get to the capital stack of affordable housing itself.
And saying that back to you with slightly different terms, LIHTC can create new affordable units at 50% or 60% AMI, but what's happening at different AMI levels, and what about units that exist that need to stay affordable? A lot more challenges there on the policy landscape.
Yeah, and I would say that the challenge then becomes, again, a geographic one. Where does the 80 to 120 AMI family buy a house in Northern Virginia? Loudoun County, not in Arlington, not in Alexandria, not in most of Fairfax County any longer. It really does cause them to have a exurban almost existence in order to be able to afford properties at that level. And so it's now putting pressure on those communities also to address issues of infrastructure. Loudoun County was horse country. Now it has to have the infrastructure of an urban area, from wastewater to electric to broadband, as Kathy was talking about earlier. All of those pieces now have to be put in place in order to create affordability. So that's a challenge for historical communities that had not been really designed or built to deal with density. And that density is really, building that density is really part of the answer to addressing that 80 to 120 band of affordability.
On the rental side as well as the owning side.
Yeah, on both sides.
Vespasi, let's come to you and what the county's doing and needs to do, should do, thinking about on the multifamily side.
Yeah, and on the multifamily side, I'll focus on the preservation. We can talk about new construction as well. So we have seen a very high push in rent increases during COVID and post-COVID. And so it was very important for us to actually launch the implementation of what we had in our books as a code since 2013, which is our right of first refusal program, that is really conceived to do exactly that, preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in the county. And what is about naturally the NOAA properties? NOAA properties are affordable today, but it doesn't mean they're going to be affordable tomorrow because they're unrestricted. And also NOAA properties sometimes are NOAA because of the disinvestment they have experienced. So their rents have stayed lower than the market because of the chronic disinvestment. And so we understand both of those issues. And the county's right of first refusal program says that if you have anything over 20 units, multifamily property that transacts in the county, we, the department, have the right of to step in, purchase it, or assign it to a party to purchase it on our behalf at the same price that it was going to transact. So we don't intervene with the influx of capital, but for the purposes of preserving affordability. And what we also say, it's also for the purposes of improving quality of life, because we do understand the disinvestment. So the last 2 years, we have been very laser focused on exercising that right, because we do understand that once NOAA properties are no longer NOAA, there is very little you can do. The market has left you. And in Prince George's County, we still have the opportunity to preserve those very precious NOAA units. And so we have been able to preserve over 1,400 apartments within just 2 years. And we have to step in and do our part. So the total magnitude of the 7 properties that we have worked on in terms of capital has been over 400 million in the county, which is about 180 per unit. Our participation has been $7 million plus some what we call pilot payment in lieu of taxes. So the way the program works is that affordable housing preservation is very different than affordable housing programs look like at the local level. It required us as a department to rethink our role. We had to move very fast. We had to move at the speed of those transactions. And we had to put in place financial tools that were enticing, they were meaningful, and they were something like we didn't have before. We had to move at the speed of the transaction, understand what the market was doing, attract that capital, but also attract it in a way that was also accomplishing what our goals in the county were, that we want to grow, but we want to grow equitably and we want to grow together. So I think this is where I see that there is opportunity to do things differently at the local level. I think sometimes we just have to think, okay, I've tried all these things and they haven't gotten me there. What other things can I try at the local level within the parameters of what governments can and cannot do? And how can I leverage my resources and my mission and attract the private sector to do the things we all want to do together?
Thank you for that. I'd like to focus next on the mission sector, and it can certainly intersect with all of these, right? It can be the partner that's doing NOAA, like Spasi was just talking about, or some of the tools that Amir was just talking about, but just zeroing our sights on it for just a moment. And Marla, let's come to you on this. We saw DC itself was second most in the country in its mission finance sector. You helpfully nuanced that by saying, yeah, maybe because of housing, maybe less because of small business, though it's not always so great everywhere else either. So we are grading on a curve if we're grading on a curve. I guess my question is, what does it take to see the sector really expand? If it's 1% now, how do we get to 2%? Or how do we get to 3%? What are the growth trajectories, investments, policy, program, whatever we need to see the sector advance?
Sure. So this is kind of where it all comes full circle for me personally, because right now in my national perch, I'm kind of replicating the model that I used in my previous life, with small businesses, with nonprofit organizations. And I think, again, just my opinion, that the way that this sector grows is through capacity building of the sector itself. So, what I have found is that there are a lot of parallels and mirroring that takes place between the communities that the CDFI sector serves and the sector itself. So you've got, sort of very well-established, long-standing, strong CDFIs, and then kind of the emerging group of CDFIs are very vulnerable, not always funded. And there's just, the spectrum is very, kind of on either end of the extreme. There's not a lot of middle ground. So I think wherever we can kind of cultivate the sector, encourage nonprofits that maybe touch small businesses or are in the housing space with non-financial services, encouraging them to sort of take that on, and that could even be kind of like developing a pipeline to CDFI certification. We are actually actively doing that with our membership, with groups that are currently community lenders, not certified, and we all know on the call that once you're certified, that attracts a whole other slew of funding opportunities that then, come down to the community once you receive that. So I think it's really about supporting and cultivating the sector of alternative financial service providers in the same way that we're, trying to do with individuals and residents and small business owners. That sort of same approach is relevant also to the sector itself. And if I could just take license to say one thing really quick about your previous comment about, like the lack of information around kind of what small business technical assistance models work and don't work. When you were saying that, it just really gave me kind of a charge, because the way that the nonprofit industry is set up, there's very little room for experimentation. So people are in their sweet spot, whether that's for the technical assistance that they're delivering or the products, the financial products, the loan size that they're kind of comfortable with. There's not a lot of room to experiment and fail. And so I think the pandemic gave us a very interesting sort of example where by force, the segment of nonprofits that serve small businesses with technical assistance were forced to kind of move into these digital and online ways of providing assistance that I can guarantee for most small businesses is much more convenient, because small business owners can't leave their businesses or step away from their computers to go attend a class or what have you. So I just think something to keep in mind, if there's anyone listening on the call that, kind of is on that philanthropic side of things. I know, in all of my nonprofit roles, that kind of flexible funding where you can really just take a chance is so rare. And so, that's why there aren't necessarily best practices. It's kind of more like what has been the practice versus like what could be the best practice. So I'll stop there because I know we're short on time, but I just wanted to answer that comment that you had made earlier.
Love it. And we'll have to chat more about that, Marla, because I have also been thinking through, it doesn't have to be a yes/no test. It could be a B type test. We don't have to deny people things, but we actually don't know what's best sometimes. So we can certainly support some experimentation. Great. Okay. Amir, what do you want to add, if anything, on how to grow the sector? And then Kathy, I want to come to you with conversation around regions and coordination. But Amir, staying with mission for a minute.
Yeah, I'll be just really quickly, since we are short on time. The example I would sort of give you is in Virginia. Over the last 5 years, has been the creation of the Virginia CDFI Coalition, which is now roughly 30 members of that coalition. But what's important, and I think this is what speaks to the ability to grow, is the coalition is not just an insular crowd of CDFIs. It's also inclusive of alternative funders. It's inclusive of policy and think tank organizations. It's inclusive of government partners. It's inclusive of even the Virginia Bankers Association. And the idea is that if we're going to grow the sector effectively, we need to be doing not only the work we do on the ground, but we need to be educating folks also as to why we are important and we provide a differentiated benefit to the community of small businesses, developers, and others, and really sort of kind of begin to slot a lane. But then I think also get to Marla's point of, it's much more effective to develop a alternative small business platform when you have the Virginia Bankers Association sitting there understanding the differentiation between the work that CDFIs do versus the work that the typical bank member of the VBA might be doing. And so it's again a bit of education along with a bit of advocacy and a bit of coalition building.
And I'd add, yeah, storytelling. Absolutely. We got a question about employee ownership businesses, and I know several of our local CDFIs are doing really good work in that space, providing technical assistance, not just loan capital. Great. Okay, I want to go to the region, Kathy, and if you could give some perspective there. I'll confess to being somebody who feels that regionalism is talked about a lot more than it's tried. And so to what extent do you think really practically it matters that the jurisdictions align around some of these types of policy supports versus maybe that's not so realistic and we have different states, let alone counties and cities, and just getting alignment of county executives and county councils is a challenge, let alone. Anyways, what would you offer for encouragement or admonition or anything you want to share there?
Yes, I would say that, I was very much a super local, very DC only based, whether it was at city council for a mayor, whether it was a company. And through the decades, extended that territory, whether it was metropolitan region, larger region, than now super region. I will say this, that I do think that given where we are in our time as a humanity, we have to start thinking at the regional level. I think commerce and workers don't see jurisdiction lines, and we're seeing that every day. People kind of work, live, play, eat, spend time across jurisdictions. When we think about skills and talent and trying to really identify talent, the next generation of workforce, and thinking about the future of work, we have a region where we have to leverage one another. And I see it in our own organization. We have people who live in Baltimore, people who live in Richmond. We're based in DC. People want to have that flexibility to have some sense of home and community, but recognize and live that flexibility that they need to for themselves. I would also say that we're in a rebuilding period post-pandemic, and we're really in a position to rethink the traditional approaches or co-create on solutions. And dollars are tight, and we have to be smart in our investments and leverage one another. Again, came from a very, very challenged industry where the appetite was to think about resetting an industry for the next 10 years, but the capacity was very, very thin internally to do that. They did not have the infrastructure to think that way. And here we are today where we have so much at our disposal across this region, super region, if you want to call it that, to be able to really think about how we are innovating and growing and thinking about issues like transportation, skills and talent, future of work, and economic growth inclusively. So I'm a big believer, Brett.
It's your work, so we wish you well in it. It's important. So we have to wrap. I have so many more questions for our panelists, and we have good ones in the Q&A. We'll try to review those and send links or resources out. Marla, thank you. Amir, thank you. Aspasia, thank you. Kathy, thank you. So appreciate your contributions on this panel, but even more importantly to the work that you're doing in and for communities. So all the best. Be well.